recognize myself. I want to thank the witnesses for being here today. You know, one thing I can assure you is that there is a need for permitting reform. There's a need because I hear it from people all over the country that come to my office that tell me their hardships and their stories about permitting. It's not just a Republican need. It's not just a House need. It's a bipartisan, bicameral need for permitting reform. And there's a lot of frustration, as we've heard today. And I like to go last in questions because it gives me a chance to listen and to hopefully kind of summarize things. But there's been a lot of fouls called today. And if this hearing had been a year ago with a Democratic administration, there would have been a lot of fouls called on this side of the aisle. Mr. Mergen, you're the legal expert here. So did the Biden administration, were they breaking the law when they kind of picked winners and losers on windmills and solar? And is the Trump administration breaking the law when they're picking winners and losers? And if they are, what's the remedy for that?
That's a complicated question, right? But I will just say that my recommendation, and I think it's the only way that this works, based on a lot of experience litigating NEPA cases, is that any NEPA reform has to apply. It shouldn't pick winners or losers. Does the law allow you to do that? I suppose Congress could enact a law that says we're going to favor fossil or we're going to favor wind.
Is that how the law is being used right now?
I think that the administration, it definitely, right, it seems undeniable that they have put a thumb on the scale against renewable energy.
Did the previous administration put the thumb on the scale? And then we can probably look back at many administrations and see that the thumb has been on the scale. And the thing that I hear is we just want a fair process and a more streamlined process. The courts are weighing in on that now. We saw the court and the Supreme Court in several decisions recently that's telling Congress, you're supposed to make the laws, and that's telling the agencies that NEPA is a process. Those are things that I think hopefully everybody elected to Congress could agree on, that there is separation of powers, and we need to do our job. If we feel like different administrations use the law differently, then it's our responsibility to change it. Mr. Hergott, I think you called me a nerd earlier, which I embrace that. And I know my wife sometimes calls me tree nerd because I've got a forestry degree, but before I was a forester, I'm an engineer, and I know we got a couple of engineers here. And I've actually done permits before for projects, and they weren't even the NEPA process, but I can tell you they were extremely frustrating. And if you're going through these permitting processes, you look at the permit application and you think, about 10% of this is actually useful and is going to protect the environment, and the rest of it is checking the box. And a lot of times it costs a lot of money to check the box. And I'm not even talking about a NEPA with a process like this behind me, just a simple clean air permit or clean water permit or water discharge permit. So I want to ask the engineers at the table, is it possible to streamline permitting and still meet all the environmental objectives and maybe even exceed those objectives and build your project? Both of y'all. If you're an engineer, you can speak up.
I'm an engineer, and I do think you can. In fact, there's no question in my mind you can, and I think we have to do that. And I thought your comment on putting your finger on the scale on either side is a real problem. We're starving for predictability in my industry. We're trying to make 35-year decisions, and we have 4-year energy policy in our country. And that is really hurting all of us. We need something, and NEPA is a part of it, to give us predictability. Tell us what you want us to do, and then we'll live within that. But now it just changes back and forth. And that's why I believe and have promoted that every energy policy should be treated the same. We shouldn't favor one or favor the other. Let's just look at the environmental impacts on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Bowles?
Engineers like structure and consistency. And if you have a process that is fair and evaluates all things just like we would in any type of design or, as you say, answering the questions on a permit that we submit, I think that those objectives can be achieved through just a little bit more structure.
I'm all for a little bit more structure and creativity in the way we accomplish our objectives here. I'm out of time. You're yielding me another minute, Mr. Peters. Well, I would also say that we could probably put 40 different people at the witness table and do this hearing all week long nonstop, and we would hear how big of a deal NEPA really is and how the permitting process is. And my goal is that we create a process that actually works to protect the environment, that actually works with a blindfold on to allow people access to the process to get their projects permitted. And we've seen on both sides of the aisle. I mean, think about the CHIPS Act. This was a bipartisan bill. I didn't vote for it, still a bipartisan bill, to build chip processing plants in the United States so we could compete globally with countries like China. Just because of the federal nexus with money, these manufacturing plants on private land had to go through the NEPA process. Now, that doesn't seem like a really common sense thing to do. We also saw the IJA, the infrastructure bill, put more money out there for infrastructure projects than it costs to build the entire interstate highway system in today's dollars. And what do we have to show for that? We got some things, but we could have had a lot more to show for that. So the objective of this hearing, I think, has been met, that we heard from frustration from both sides of the aisle. I appreciate the witness's testimony. And I'm going to give each witness a minute to say anything else you think we need to hear that you might not have gotten asked in about 4 hours of sitting there. We'll start with Mr. Bowles.
I'm not sure what else to add that we haven't covered, because we've covered from A to Z and back again and back down again. So I don't know. I just appreciate your time and the committee's time in inviting us here to discuss this.
Mr. Campbell.
For me, very briefly, I thought it's been rewarding to sit here and listen to the conversation today, even though there's divisiveness. Some people are on one side, some are on the other. I felt that everybody wants to solve the problem, and this is a solvable problem. And it'll be good for all of the people in America. The people at the end of our lines will benefit from that. Thank you.
Mr. Mergen.
I want to thank you for having me. What I greatly appreciated hearing from the members and my fellow witnesses. And what I heard from them is that we need stability in this process. And I think that is undeniable. And I really strongly support a stable process, which we don't have right now. And I would just strongly counsel this very serious endeavor that you're undertaking to remember average Americans, the interests of all Americans and their ability to participate in this process in a meaningful way. We can talk about how complicated that process is or what's robust, but it seems really important when I worked in Wyoming that the people in Wyoming were heard, right? The ranchers and the farmers. And it was also important that people who cared about Yellowstone or Grand Teton and the greater Yellowstone ecosystem had a voice. And so we need to focus on reforms that keep the public engaged. And I think the litigation problems are on the way to being solved. And I would just stress that as well.
And I would agree with you on having public input. I don't think we need to do away with that either. Mr. Hergott?
I think, I worked for the late Senator Inhofe for about 12 years, and his best friend was Bernie Sanders and Boxer. And although I stood behind him while he threw a snowball on the Senate floor, at the same time, he walked over and they cut deals on some of the largest infrastructure bills in the history of our country, safety loop, that had very low chance of making it over the finish line, and were the model for IIJ and others. I think it's important, and to Mr. Peters, to your question about offshore wind, I think it's extremely important that we eject the decisions about energy choices and much like on cost allocation or FERC 1000 on transmission, there is the process that is the process that is the process. Then there is the business case for energy source and the situations there within. If we continue to allow that discussion and the overarching political discussion distract us from doing the bread and butter of what we know, which is getting to a decision in a reasonable amount of time with the right consultation and all of the things that are required, because at the end of the day, in 2014, President Obama on the State of the Union, natural gas, I'll knock down the red tape and I'll build it on my own if I have to. He's talking about natural gas, and 4 years later, we're talking about something else. And so the politics, I'm not naive enough to think the politics aren't going to change, and there's realities there within. But on this issue, if we can inoculate and go in a room and take the other stuff out, if you don't fix the process now, it was a shame that there was not one single piece of permitting in the IRA bill. All the money, none of the ability to get there. FRA, statutory changes, none of the ability to enforce it on the Senate, or at least from the congressional standpoint. The ability to, we can complain all we want, but at the end of the day, the Congress hasn't legislated on permitting in a very long time, and when we leave it to other people, we have no one to complain about but ourselves, and confession is good for the soul after a long time in the Senate, writing press releases on permitting bills that I thought did things that didn't at all. And now that in the trenches, I earnestly think that if we can come together, we can fix some problems.
Thank you, and I would add to that I like your idea of separating the permitting process from the business process. Let permitting be blind to the technology and the project, and let investors and the economy pick the winners and losers as to what should be built. I think we would all be better off if we could go down that road.